Hello and welcome to week 3. We are looking at models of instruction, so direct and gradual release. Here is our agenda. So first we're going to look at the direct instruction, and that is most common, especially in elementary school, then gradual release, and then application. So first, direct instruction. There are 6 different strategies. First, direct instruction is more of a teacher-centered. So think about church or a lecture-based. This right here would be a direct instruction example. But first, you are going to monitor and diagnose where those students are. So that could be activating their knowledge of what they learned before, but it's also looking at where they might be. Then you're actually going to present the content. So that is you teaching them what this is. So right now we are doing teacher input is what it was called way back when, but you're presenting the content to the students. Next would be the guided practice part, or guiding the students through practice. And oftentimes that is used with small group instruction, kind of a you do, I do, we go kind of back and forth. And then the fourth step would be providing that feedback. So using what they did in that practice from the third step and really going over to make sure if there's any errors, you correct those. Then you're moving into independent practice, seeing if they are mastering it based on giving those feedback. Then you're seeing if they can do it independently without any guidance from you or a peer. Then regular reviews. We don't want to just teach something and then all of a sudden we forget about it. You want to continually review it. So we'll go in more in depth in each one of these. So first one is that strategy of monitoring and diagnosing, which gauges the progress to inform the teaching. So this step is to emphasize the relationship between lessons. You want them to activate what they learned yesterday or from their prior knowledge. So it's not just a random thing that we're learning. You want them to be engaged, and in order to do that, you need to monitor and diagnose where they are. The second one is presenting that content. So this can be done several different ways, as you can see on the slide. You can do subdivided or taught in small steps. This can also be presented in different ways. So you can have introduce and divide, which is the first strategy, which allows students the time to really look at the content, explore it, but then come back to it. You can also do a more real world way, and we'll get more into these. Again, this is a huge overview of the steps to teach. So don't get overwhelmed with all of these different ways. It'll come more natural once you start looking at standards and it's like, oh, I could break this up into smaller sections when you are looking at the standards. It's a little bit easier when it's in context opposed to just learning about it. The third strategy, which is more of the guided practice, which is prompting, that's where you have them in groups or going back and forth of you do a question and then we'll come back. Or you and your partner do 3 questions and then we'll come back together to check them. This is the way that you would want them to use the resources that you had when teaching. So you have different prompting strategies. Verbal, which is, hey, don't forget about this step. Gesturally, I would do songs, especially like with long division. I would just do like, this was assigned for dividing, and I would just do that. And they were like, oh, I know the next step is to divide. Physically, I often would use an anchor chart just to have those big concepts or the big steps, especially for science and math. But I could just walk over and be like, don't forget. And they knew exactly what to do just based on that anchor chart. That's also when you do much more guided. And you can see the different levels of prompting. And you want to start with the less invasive, I guess would be the best word, so that they still take ownership of their learning. And then you would go back to full class checks so that they can see, oh, I did this correct, or I missed this step, especially I'm using long division, but I forgot to subtract in that long division. So they are able to see where they need assistance or they did it all correct. Next is still the same part, but guided practice is using modeling. So first you want that attention, making sure you see what their learners are doing and thinking. If you see that glazed look, then you need to come back together and have them relook at how to do adding and subtracting fractions. You really have to know your students and how they perform in order to see the best way to model. But the biggest thing is making sure that they are engaged and they are seeing what they need to do. So there's 4 different strategies for modeling: attention, retention, production, and motivation. Motivation is one of the harder ones, but it all comes from you. A lot of times students don't have that intrinsic motivation, but you have to give that desirable you have to express what you want that desirable outcome, and then you have to praise them for getting there. And most students do not get there on their own. Next is the 4th strategy, which is one that is hard as a teacher, because we often just think, oh, just grading something and giving it back. But there's much more to that than just those graded assignments. You should be constantly giving feedback, walking around saying, oh, don't forget about this step, or add this here, or make sure you're using this academic vocabulary. But providing feedback all throughout, and this feedback should be positive and constructive, but it helps them build that confidence in their academics, but also corrects their errors. These are the 4 different ways, and you can read on the slide, but correct, quick, and firm, that is the most frequent, just because we don't have time as a teacher to sit down and really give a whole bunch of feedback. It's just not feasible. Correct but hesitant frequently occurs in a practice or a feedback session. And this is usually in the beginning or the middle of the lesson when they're not as confident in that concept, but throughout they'll get more confident based on their practice and doing it correctly. But that's why feedback is so important. And then incorrect because of carelessness, and that could just be throughout the day. And then incorrect because of lack of knowledge. Just making sure that we know the difference between those two, because it could just be, oh, it's the end of the day, they're tired, or they don't actually know how to multiply using 2-digit numbers. Then the 5th strategy is mastering through independent practice. So that is a huge component, especially in the upper elementary setting. You want to make sure that they can master those skills without you. And so you give them independent practice to show if they are competent in that concept and not just with you or with a peer. In the younger grades, you might just do 1 or 2 questions. In the upper grades, you might give more. This could also be in the homework setting, or we always had like a smart block or an intervention block, and that's when we did a lot of independent practice, and I was able to communicate some of that feedback, but also review some of those skills. And that's actually the next strategy, which is reviewing skills. So I took a screenshot of what one of my homeworks looked like for math. And I did very small homeworks just because I knew my students, and they also had science and other courses. But as you can see in this example, we're not just looking at one specific skill. We're looking at a variety of skills. And that way I can take this time to reteach and go over things that students might not have grasped the first time, but it also keeps it in their brain. So whenever we got to that EOG or end of grade testing, I did not have to go through every single standard as in depth because they had been practicing them all year long. And it really helped students score higher than most. I know that seemed like a whole lot for one lesson. So I have used this strategy to help kind of think about it during your meat of your lesson. You should be using I do, which is where the teacher models. We do, which is class participation or partners, and you have them come up to the board or in little groups or partners. Something that they are collaborating and able to talk about the concept. And then you do, which is student completes it independently. All of this is scaffolded throughout, so you're able to give feedback. So all of those were that direct instruction. You are up there lecturing. Now, this is actually my favorite way to teach, is the indirect instruction or gradual release. And this is more of a strategy that encourages that cognitive process, and they are taking ownership of their learning. And it's a different way to think, and it's much more complex than direct instruction, but the teacher kind of takes a step back. You are more of the facilitator, and the students have to take more ownership. So I would give students a prompt and then they would discuss it. They would come up with a theory. And again, we will get into this, especially in your science course, about how to do gradual release or inquiry-based learning. It is a great way to help encourage students and help that engagement factor that sometimes is lost in the classroom, but students have to be an active learner. Here are some strategies. So content organization. So it's much more conceptual inquiry and problem solving. So think of giving them a problem and they have to come up with that theory. Conceptual movement, not just sitting in a desk. They're able to move, they're able to explore, and actually tangibly look at things. The third way is using questions. Many times students would ask me, I don't get this. And it's like, okay, well, what do you not understand? Do you not understand that this is a long division or how to do it or what's the next step? And using those probing questions of, okay, what do you do first with a long division problem? Well, I have to write it out. Okay, write it out. What do you do next? Well, I check and see. Does this number go into this number? Okay, so we would use those questions and they would in turn actually answer their own question based on my questions. And then learner experiences. So student-centered learning and unguided discovery learning. So using what they know and what they're able to bring to the table to add value to what they are learning about. And so here's an example of an indirect instruction. And this is just the question that I would start the day off with. And many times this is how I would start my science class. So, and this is actually a slide from my 5th grade class. Why do you think there are lines/cracks in the sidewalk? I would have my students collaborate, and then we would do an investigation on why there are cracks in the sidewalk. And we would talk about expanding and contracting with the weather, and it was one of the intro lessons to our weather unit. So this week we talked about models of instruction, direct and gradual. We will learn more about this, but this is just to get you familiar with what type of instruction this is. So if you have any questions, please let me know and reach out. Thank you so much.